Welcome back to the M&M Discipleship Podcast, where we discuss what it means to be a disciple of Christ. We aim to look for God in our daily lives, be in His Word, and strive to live out the teachings of Jesus. This is Dakota Moody. This is my co-host, Michael Round. Michael, how are you doing this morning?
Pretty good. Pretty good. It's been nice having fall weather, and the leaves are in full color. And so it's been a good couple of weeks.
Now, question for you, Michael, on that. What is your favorite colors for the leaves to change? Because for me, there's not enough maples. You know, I'm always big on the maples because the maples turn the red.
Okay,
A
yeah.
lot of the other ones are like yellow, which yellow
Yeah.
can be nice if they're like with the oranges and the reds. But whenever it's
Right.
just like a mountain of yellow, it's like, yeah.
No, I think I like the oranges and reds better as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a particular tree downtown here, and it's just a bright orange. It's beautiful. So that's probably what I would say. But I'm with you. I want a mixture, and I probably prefer the red
Yeah.
as
Though
well.
you are not somebody who is against the color yellow. I'm not a fan of yellow. Neither is my wife. You actually like yellow.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm good with yellow. I'm good with yellow,
Yeah.
especially with when it's with green,
Yeah, I was about to say, especially when it's green.
or blue. So
Yes, also true. Is it the same shade of yellow, West Virginia and Packers
Green
yellow?
Bay.
I feel like West
No.
Virginia says more gold, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. West
Yeah.
Virginia's gold, and then Green Bay is it's like yellow.
Yeah. Because they're
Um,
trying to replicate that cheese that gets made.
mhm.
It's like
Yeah,
that shade of yellow. So anyway.
yeah.
Well, there you go. Well, I agree that it is beautiful to have the leaves as changed as they are and everything. And like I said, I think my favorite is the reds that I'm seeing right outside my window. But it's rare to have maples in this portion of the country. I feel like there's a little
Hmm.
places where there's more maples than other places, and those are always good. So in
I'm
talking
not
about
into, is that what dendrology? Is that the study of
dendrol, that
trees?
is very good,
Okay,
sir.
yes. So
Very good,
I'm
sir.
not very much into that. So
That's right. I got a
I know
C
you
in
were
dendrology.
in a forestry track for a while, so
That's right. Yes, I got a C
you're
in
a little more
dendrology.
into that than I am.
Yes. A B in wood identification, though, is very good at identifying the different kinds of wood at one point. Now, don't ask me about any of that now, but there was that little bit of time whenever I did that. But yes, very good dendrology. I think that's just identifying leaves, trees by
Okay,
their leaves, I think is what that is.
let's
Um,
see.
yes. Well, you going to Google dendrology?
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
The scientific study of trees.
Okay, and so it is just the study of all trees in general. I just know in my dendrology class they made me collect leaves, so
Yeah,
I
yeah.
had to do
I
it and then
mean,
identify them by their leaves.
yeah. That's one of the
Yeah.
best ways to identify a tree.
So yeah, there you go. There you go. Well, and
Yeah.
speaking of seeing things and identifying them, what are you going to say?
Not to say, I wonder if anybody had that on their bingo card.
Oh yeah,
Dendrology
yeah, that's right. Their
for the
M&M
episode
bingo
today.
card is going to be
Yes.
about dendrology. I can assure you, it was not. Um,
What were you talking about seeing God
so
recently? Yeah, you
let's
go
talk
ahead
about
first,
that.
man.
Well, I was just going to talk about. I was trying to just transition. Um, trying to transition from us talking about seeing things to where we see God in our lives. So Michael, why don't you go ahead and tell us where you have seen God this week in the world?
Yeah. Where I would say I've seen him is through working through the efforts at church. We had a
Mm,
trunk or treat over the weekend, and we had some people post in our there's a Facebook group, uh, a local Facebook group that is probably about the best place to disseminate information.
that's the way it
And
works nowadays. If you want people in the town to
yeah,
know something, you got to post it on the town's Facebook page.
yes.
Yes.
And so in doing that, there was a lot of people, more people probably from our community than people from our church came, and it was awesome. And so
Mm,
another opportunity to hopefully um, show some love and kindness to our
mm,
community. We offered a meal, and there were some people that came through that needed that. And so
mhm.
that's I see God working in the efforts of our congregation, and God blessing people through our efforts, and that's really a lot of our responsibility as the church.
Mm. Very nice. Um, So that's, I
What
mean,
about
it's
you?
always great. It's always great whenever you can have those kind of activities. You get the amount of people in, especially that you talked about, that kind of community connection within your church
Mhm.
that you have. I think that is something that has been missing more and more in modern churches, is how that we've kind of disconnected from our community. So that's always good when you can get those kind of events. And we had something similar here recently that we also did, but not quite the amount of same people that you got in for yours. But I need to find if there's a Talk of Anderson page, because
Mm.
that was what it was called in Texas. There was a Talk of Alvin and Talk of Pearland. What is your Facebook page called for McMinnville?
McMinnville chatter. And
McMinnville chatter. There you
yeah,
go.
yeah, yeah.
There
It ends
you
up being a lot of gossip, a lot of who's doing this, that, and the other. And
go.
but there's some good that comes from
There's
it.
some good that comes from it. Yes, like alerting the people that there is an event. So that's really good. Um, I tell you where I've seen God recently is the um in previous episodes, we touched on it. I think in first or second episode, we touched on the amount of people outside of where we think of the West that are becoming Christians, converting to Christ, and uh, doing a little bit more research on this. I found that there are, in countries where it is very hostile to be a Christian, places like Iran, places like North Korea, uh, there are people who are working that are making disciples,
Mm,
planting churches in some of the most persecution heavy areas in the world.
mm,
And it amazed me to see that, because you think about a place like in Iran, a place like a North Korea, especially a place where you can't even really exit the country or enter the country
mm.
for most people. And you think about that, and I was just amazed. And you can see where God is working even in the most difficult of situations. Because I couldn't think of a more difficult situation really to be in the world than
Mm.
to be a Christian in North Korea or in an Iran or in Afghanistan or somewhere in those areas, Northern Africa, and even in many portions of India as well, where people are making disciples. The church is growing in areas under the harshest oppressions and
Mm.
persecutions. And that is where I've seen God, because no matter what the human efforts, no matter what Satan's efforts are to stifle the good news of Jesus Christ, to stifle the gospel, people are still coming to Christ even in these situations. And that is where I have definitely seen God recently in ways in which I had no awareness of before.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so when we think about this, we think about God working in places on the other side of the world. We think about him working in our own backyard. So
Hmm.
it's important to look for his work in all of these places. So we're working through the Sermon on the Mount, and this has been a good study so far.
Hmm.
I really enjoyed going back through this familiar passage, and we're now to Matthew 5, 21 through 26. Dakota, do you want to read that, or would you like me to?
Absolutely. I've got it, brother.
Okay, sounds good.
Matthew 5:21 through 26. And it reads, "You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says you fool will be liable to the hell of fire. So if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge to the guard, and you be put in prison. Truly, I say to you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny."
Mm, some pretty strong words to people on anger and murder. Why do you think he talks about the importance of not insulting people in relation to murder? Because, in our minds, there's a big difference between murdering somebody and insulting them or calling them a fool.
Mhm.
Why do you think he has those things connected?
Mm. Well, I think it goes back again to what we kind of discussed last week, which is the idea that you had the law, And the law was going to be imperfect, but it was supposed to be the teacher that leads us to Christ and his teachings at this point. And you would think that many people would probably say, well, I'm not murdering them. And so, but in saying, calling them whatever name, that's fine because I'm not, according to the law of Moses, committing murder. But what God is saying here is that your words can also be violence against another person. And I don't want to get into the whole words or violence that some people have talked about in the modern day, but in many ways, you can do much more damage with the words that you say, with how you talk about somebody than you ever could with your hands. And really, in that way, committing this wrongdoing to somebody else and insulting them, putting them down, it shows a hate and a disregard for them as a human being in the same way, in some extent, that murder can also. Obviously, you're not extinguishing a life, but you are committing a form of violence against them. And I do think that is why Jesus is emphasizing this, that so many people would say, well, it's not that I hurt them. It's not that I murdered them. It's not that I killed them. No, but you are committing violence against God's creation, against those who are created in God's image, who are loved by God, but with your words and what you say. And so be careful about what you say.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And two, if you don't harbor these kinds of things in your heart, it's very unlikely for them to come out in your actions.
Mm-hmm.
I think we often put band-aids on sins, and we try and avoid the sin itself, and obviously we should, but there's something behind, and there's an importance to getting to the heart of the matter. Quit harboring anger and hatred, like what Paul says, don't let the sun go down on your anger. Get rid of that. Don't hold on to it. Don't insult other people. If you never insult anyone, I would be very surprised if you'd ever get to the point of murdering someone.
Right.
So Jesus is also kind of trying to get them to look into their heart and consider that. He also talks about being reconciled to people. And it's important to note that, again, with those words of Paul about not letting the sun go down in your anger, you shouldn't be holding grudges. You should be trying to make peace with people. It's one of the Beatitudes. We should be striving to be at peace with everybody. At least, like Paul says, as so far as it depends on you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's something you bring up, connection points between not being angry with somebody, not harboring that frustration, because as you say, a lot of times, these crimes of passions are not how these things happen, where it's just a instantaneous, oh, I'm wanting to commit violence against you. It's usually something that has built over a long time period. And when you talk about being reconciled to somebody immediately, what we see, the point there being, hey, you need to be reconciled to them as soon as possible. You might think, okay, well, I'll go and give my gifts to God, which is obviously something that's commanded, obviously something that we should do, give our gifts to God. But Jesus is saying your priority needs to be reconciling things to your brother before you go to God and giving gifts to him. You need to reconcile with him first, because that could really affect what you're doing as it regards giving your offering. And I think a good connection point for us in the modern day, if we're looking for application points here, is that, hey, many of us have experienced times when we've had something against somebody in the church. And you talk about going into worship, harboring hard feelings towards another brother and sister in Christ. And you're there to offer your worship to God. Well, God is telling you through Christ Jesus, the Son of God, that you need to reconcile yourself with your brother first before offering your gifts of worship to God. And we may think that's the priority, and I'll deal with the other thing later, but that's not what Jesus is wanting us to do. Jesus is wanting us to reconcile with our brother and sister who has wronged us, who have wronged, and reconcile that before we give our gifts of worship to him.
Yeah. And we should also recognize, before we move on, the stakes. This is not something Jesus takes lightly.
No.
I mean, if we're insulting, we're liable to the council, and if we say "fool, you fool," we're liable to the hell of fire. The Jewish council was a way of it was a judicial system in that day. Our words do matter, and I think probably just as important is our heart and thoughts behind those words matter. And like you said, if we're harboring that, especially against people in the church, that can be really damaging. And so we should be reconciled to our brother. Dakota, you got anything else on our passage today before we go on?
I think we covered that well, but I will emphasize that point that you made as well, that a lot of times there's people who would see Jesus as just this moral teacher. He's all about love and not harsh language. Well, oftentimes Jesus used some very harsh language, not sinful language, not negative language, but the truthful language.
Yeah.
Very, very stark language when he is not messing around by saying what's going to happen in these situations if you don't do this. Well, it's very point blank what he says in this situation. And he does this often where he talks about things and he does not sugarcoat it. He says it as
Yeah.
it is. And I think that's something that we need to remember. Not that we need to go around and not be careful about what we say or season our tongues before we speak, but there are some truths that need to be said. And he said them with the authority that he had.
Yeah. No, really good point. Really good point. And we cannot neglect that when we think about Jesus. So when we think about our last segment, what it is you're reading, I know that you're kind of in a transition book wise, but do you have something that you're reading?
Yeah, there's a few books in my rotation that when I have a spare second, and I kind of do somewhat in my reading because we've got some things going on at church here in the near future that I'm looking towards that I'm going to be reading some books about. However, they're coming in on Amazon, so I got to wait for those to get in for a few days. And while I've also got some other reading I'm trying to do, there's a few rotation of books that I'll always kind of go back to because they're just benchmark books in my faith, and a lot of them end up being right here below this nice PBC cup I have over here. Some of those being Prayer by Tim Keller, because I think that's always important to talk about prayer and being better and more intentional about prayer. And he talks about that in that book, Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, which is just the foundational book of C.S. Lewis. I know that there's a lot of other, everybody would think Chronicles of Narnia, other such things. That's the one for me. Some of his most quotable lines are from that book, and I just love that so much. Cost Discipleship, Dietrich Bonhoeffer as well. Me and Michael have read through that before. It's good. And then Celebration of Discipline by Richard Foster. Love that book as well, talking about spiritual disciplines. But one of the books that are in that rotation for me is Renovation of the Heart by Dallas Willard. And he is talking about in this book the ideas a lot of times that we have about what Christianity is going to look like is out of whack, out of order. Because when we talk about how do we overcome sin, well, it's not just about white knuckling it. It's not about just force of will. It's about renovating the heart, as he says, and changing the heart from the inside out. And he talks a lot about what that looks like and what that means for the Christian and how that happens in a life given to God, and really how we should devote our lives fully to God in that way, and not just be this casual faith that we have to white knuckle a lot of sins if we just have this casual faith, because we're not fully giving ourselves over to God and not fully living for him. And if we're not doing those things, well, then how can we expect to have a full faith to be able to overcome the world? We can't do that. And he talks about that within this book. So this is why I would always suggest, if you got a chance to read a book, this is not for beginner readers. I will just warn you, he's got some very hefty language in here, as in just some hard things to swallow sometimes, which is, by the way, the same thing I'd say about C.S. Lewis. Love him, but he's also, sometimes you really got to sit and marinate a little bit on what he's got to say. There's some other people who are a little bit easier to read to start, people like Francis Chan and David Platt and others like that, who could be a little bit easier to read, but love Dallas Willard in this book. And I would say, if you're looking for something to deepen your faith, deepen your spirituality, and you're looking to take that next step, this is a book for you. So, Michael, what about yourself? What are you reading?
Well, before I get onto that, I mean, that really gets in the book you're talking about, gets into what we talked about in Matthew 5, that it needs to be a change of heart toward those individuals. But what I'm reading, I'm finishing up, I should finish it today, is Encounters with Jesus by Tim Keller. It's been a good book so far. I really enjoyed it, just talking about different people's encounter with Jesus in the Bible, in the Gospels. And so I was going to share a couple of quotes or a couple of concepts from that. He shared toward the end, he said this: what the heart trusts, the mind justifies, the emotions desire, and the will carries out. And that goes right back to your heart. What the heart trusts, So if we're trusting God, he says, then the mind justifies. We will look for ways to justify that in a good way, and the emotions desire, and the will carries out. I mean, to a certain degree, we do what we want to do. Um, you know, when it comes to our priorities, we prioritize things we want to do. Might not always be the best things, but what our body wants to do, what our mind wants to do. And so he's just getting to the fact that our heart does need to change, very much like what Dallas Willard's getting at. But then the last thing that I'll share from that book is he presents two different kind of doubters or doubts. He talks about honest doubts and dishonest doubts. And Keller does a really good job of confronting those doubts. I mean, he worked in New York City for, decades, and he encountered a lot of skeptics, and he didn't shy from that. Instead, he really taught to that and tried to help skeptics through. And we probably understand the difference. An honest doubter is humble and open to reason and, genuine in their search for truth. Whereas someone who has dishonest doubts might say things like, well, that's stupid. That's just dumb, and completely dismiss it without thinking through or without discussing what those doubts are about. And so, I'm not saying that doubts are the best thing ever, but I think we should be honest with ourselves and share our doubts that we have and work through them. And if we are humble, I mean, like one of the ones he talks about was Mary, and how she didn't see how God could do it, but she knew that God could, and she trusted that everything would be possible with God. And there's also Thomas, how Thomas was open to seeing Jesus, touching Jesus, and his mind was changed. Jesus handled doubters with respect, and he didn't dismiss them. You lost your chance because you doubted me. He tried to help them to belief, and we should try and help other doubters toward belief. But just that was an interesting thing. When we encounter those different kinds of people that are honest and humble, and then people who are dishonest, and the fact that they're just blinding, they're putting their hands over their eyes and plugging their ears, and not genuinely trying to find the truth.
Absolutely. I do think, there's that difference between those who are maybe have a spiritual mind to them, but they are skeptical about the Christian faith or particular things within the Christian faith. And I think, honestly, in America, that's the biggest group that we should be targeting to evangelize, because there's others who are just resistant and hostile to the message of Christ. But then there are those who are searching for something, seeking for something. And in that way, we can show them Christ and hope to overcome. And I feel like that is hugely important to us. And also, by the way, Thomas, doubting Thomas, as he's called, always gets a bad rap. He always gets a bad rap, even though he was the only one who didn't get to see Christ initially. So How many other of the disciples would have been in there? Oh, I think the power went out. Oh no.
This may be really awkward, but Dakota lost power. So forgive us on that. It completely froze in the middle, but we were finishing up our episode. We went through our different segments, and we really appreciate you joining us today on the M&M Discipleship Podcast. Until next time, let's look for God, learn from his word, and live out his teachings. Have a blessed day.